So what dies is not the ego per se. What dies is your identification with the ego. The main problem coming back into this dimension is my first thought was, I can see now why Rose thought he might have gone nuts. Because the mind can't compute what you know when you know what you are. It's beyond the ability of the mind to compute. The mind can't compute absolute beingness. It can't compute non-duality. So anybody who becomes enlightened and returns, the focus returns into the mind, will see that. And to me, it maybe took half an hour for the mind to bow to the fact that there was a larger truth than it was capable of computing.
The nonprofit TAT Foundation was created in 1973 to bring spiritual seekers and finders together. We publish books, videos, and a free online newsletter. We maintain a website of spiritual resources and hold 4 spiritual retreat weekends each year. Our goal is to offer practical guidance for following a spiritual path and living a spiritual life. For more information, go to tatfoundation.org. That's tatfoundation.org.
My feeling is that life has to challenge our belief in individuality. That's going to be the final step, final challenge that will put us in the position for having a breakthrough. And my feeling also is that conviction of individuality is like the keystone in an arch of faulty beliefs about what we are. And the other stones in the arch are personality related. So our beliefs that we're a person who X, Y, Z. And so what I've observed in my own mind, I assume this is sort of the default way minds work, but I might be wrong about this, is that when life throws evidence at me that one of my beliefs about myself as a person has been challenged, the mind tends to flip to the opposite belief. So I started off having a strong conviction I was the doer. When I started watching the mind and seeing what was happening with the machinery of the mind, I saw no evidence that I could ever claim responsibility for doing something, because the doing all is preceded by decisions. It's a decision-making process I've seen running in the mind, and I've never decided ahead of time to make a decision even. And so I saw no evidence to support that I was the doer, and yet I had the feeling that maybe there is some way, even if it's indirect, that I am influencing doing. So, but before, and actually that wasn't the first step was to flip over to the side, okay, I'm not the doer, but then the more I looked, and the more I became conscious of my feeling, well, maybe I can't prove to myself there isn't some way I'm not indirectly affecting doing, then it put that belief in just a shaky position, which the mind doesn't like, or at least mine certainly didn't like. But I think that's the position that our self-beliefs have to get into before it's productive, anyway, for the keystone to drop out. I have a feeling that if the keystone drops out from trauma before the other parts of the arch are loosened up, then there'll still be... So basically what I've seen is when my mind was forced into a corner where I felt there was no option but to give up the ghost, that my life was, there was nothing I could do to keep living, that the mind would open at that point. But when it did 2 different times, what happened is it wasn't a full realization. And so my feeling is, if there's still like what these beliefs we have about ourselves are like roots that are coming out at the edge of a precipice, and if we're getting ready to fall into the precipice and there's something to grab onto, we'll do it. Yeah.
Pat, can you talk a little bit about this dynamic that I have, maybe others have, that when you see some aspect or something you don't like it, that whole, there's a binding to it, there's maybe a wasted cycle of self-recrimination about that kind of, I don't detect you had a lot of that maybe, but.
Oh, I think I probably did, yeah. I think the key is becoming conscious of the beliefs we have about ourselves that underlie those convictions. And those are basically, so life is challenging what we call our ego, our beliefs about what we are, which are faulty in the sense they may be partially true, but they're never the truth. And so...
Not about like shame or, I should be, that kind of stuff.
Sure,
I don't know if you had a lot of that.
I never knew what people were talking about when they talked about shame. And one time, so Mike Connors, if you remember him, he used to talk about that quite a bit. And one time I asked him, well, what do you mean by shame? And he says, the feeling that something's wrong with me. And I thought, what? Doesn't everybody feel that? So lots of times it was just a question of vocabulary. So I didn't know I was shameful until the end. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you may actually have been more shameful than most people because it's just like a background state, but other people...
Maybe. Yeah.
So Art, you're saying that if in the case of like a trauma, you feel like if those more fundamental convictions and beliefs have not been seen through or questioned, then there might still
They're actually lesser beliefs to me. But if those aren't still hanging over the precipice, the roots are hanging over the precipice, it would be something for us to grab onto if the mind finds itself in a position of giving up, you could say, giving up the ghost. Okay. Yeah, so that's my guess is it actually is a detriment for the keystone to drop out first by trauma.
So that's kind of the whole point of spiritual work is to get rid of those roots so that...
Well, to me, the point of spiritual work is to question our convictions about what we are. Or conversely, the flip side of the coin about what the world is, self and other. Convictions about ourself are the sticky ones.
You once told me that we can become enlightened before we're healed of trauma. That's possible.
I think that's what he means by the keystone dropping out.
Right.
So it seems
but we can become enlightened before that happens.
So it seems to me like some people undo their belief systems until they get to the final point of awakening, and other people have some traumatic event that awakens the mind, but they still have all this conditioning that they have to deal with that they haven't processed. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm not even, it's not clear to me what healing of trauma would be. So,
like emotional trauma or pain or...
Yeah, so a memorable statement from Rose was, if a whoremaster is enlightened, he'll come back a whoremaster. Yeah, that it doesn't do anything to perfect enlightenment, per se, doesn't do anything to perfect this stuff. And so Rose recommended that everybody try to clean up their act as much beforehand as possible.
Because after you're enlightened and you're still a whoremaster, you don't want to change.
Well, so if you come back into the mind dimension after enlightenment, which isn't necessarily the case, but if you do, you'll come back to the mentality that is there.
So somebody can be enlightened and come back to the regular self? Is that such thing?
Come back to what?
To the regular self?
Well, yeah. So what dies is not the ego per se. What dies is your identification with the ego. So when after my realization, which was on a Sunday night, I was up in the northern part of Pennsylvania, and I scheduled my retreat to end on a Sunday night because on Monday, I had self-inquiry discussion group meetings in Pittsburgh. And if I went home, I would have to go home an hour and a half south of Pittsburgh and then go back to Pittsburgh for the meeting. So I scheduled it so I could just leave northern Pennsylvania Monday noon or whatever and get into Pittsburgh for the evening meeting. And my ego was working fine at the meeting. There was a young fellow who came, a new fellow, hadn't been there before, came with two girls, one of, I think was his girlfriend, and he wouldn't shut up. He wanted to shine in front of the girls. So I put very politely, which is naturally, that's me, right? I very politely said, you know, I don't think you get an idea of what we're trying to do here. If you would just be quiet for a while and listen, then maybe you can catch on. And he wasn't. So I got up from my chair, I went over and I stood behind him and said, look, either leave or I'll take you out the door. And he got up and left. So my ego was functioning fine. The main problem coming back into this dimension is my first thought was, I can see now why Rose thought he might have gone nuts. Because the mind can't compute what you know when you know what you are. It's beyond the ability of the mind to compute. The mind can't compute absolute beingness. It can't compute non-duality. So anybody who becomes enlightened and returns, the focus returns into the mind, will see that. And to me, it maybe took half an hour for the mind to bow to the fact that there was a larger truth than it was capable of computing.
And then it just gave up trying?
Yeah. There wasn't any reason to. Yeah.
But if there was a reason, he will continue to bring back the ego?
No, the ego is just part of the machinery. You need it. You wouldn't cross the street safely if the ego weren't functioning. Fears are necessary. Desires are necessary for this stuff.
You talked about, like, burning out a resistor, or that you had experience of.
That was
it
the
like
feeling of what had
erosion for you.
happened, yeah.
So how does that connect them with, like, the roots and, what am I trying to ask, like?
I don't know, some of these metaphors you can't carry too far.
Well, just.
So at that point, I would say the roots were gone. There weren't any roots left there.
Right.
Yeah.
That absence of roots in some way facilitated in you being able to see or accept what you saw.
No, so let me also get into that a little bit more about what I saw. But no, that was what I saw. I could tell my intuition was working to compute the fact that what I saw, I realized either that's true or what I currently believe is true. They can't both be true. And after the intuition, I wasn't watching the intuition working, but there was a definite duration. And so I'm just assuming that the computation was being done by the intuition. And when it came to the conclusion of which one was true, that's when I felt that there was some kind of a resistance. I don't know if I even felt there was some kind of resistance being burned out at the time, where in retrospect I felt that was like a description of how to talk to myself about what happened in the circuitry. So there may be in the circuitry, whatever that is, it's imaginary in my mind, there may be a resistor built in there to keep the focus here in this dimension.
And do you look at that as being at all tied to, like, feelings or conviction states or traumas, things like that?
No. I hadn't thought about this before, but it may be something that develops, that isn't there at birth and develops very early on. Because with the child infant death syndromes, the way Rose saw it, he said, these kids, they come into this dimension, they look around and they say, no thanks. He says they're too smart to stay. So all this stuff's just speculation on my part, though, you know, just, yeah.
I have a question about, what's in reference to your comment about what Roach said about if a whoremaster gets enlightened, they're still a whoremaster. Because when I look at myself, most of my objectionable egoistic reactions are due to fear. Fear. I'm trying to protect the little self. You know what I mean? It's like I'm going to injure you. So it occurs to me that that a lot of those would fall away because you would recognize that they're no longer needed. It's not necessary. I mean, you would still have the egoic preferences for chocolate ice cream or, be a good swimmer. Some of the things aren't based in that individual, that need to protect the separateness, but most of the objectionable ones are. Wouldn't you? Like, how do you react to that? So that it wouldn't create a difference if you truly became enlightened and realized you don't need to protect that little.
Yeah, so I would say the strongest difference I noticed along that line was that I could afford to feel feelings as deep as they wanted to go, as opposed to before enlightenment. I had a fear of being overwhelmed, and I had to try to keep a rein on feelings. But in terms of fears and desires, so the other thing is, I think my reactions were pretty much the same as before, but my reactions to the reactions changed. So what irritated me before would still irritate me, but then my reactions to that irritation would be different.
And how would they be different, your reaction to the irritations?
Well, depending on the situation, it might, instead of biting somebody's head off, I might laugh at myself.
But you
I might go ahead and bite their head off, but
You would feel like it was initially biting someone's head off, but then your reaction was not to do it.
well, I think the initial reaction would be like irritation or anger or, it's a feeling, and then interpretation that hits, or the reaction to the feeling is, I better bite this guy's head off,
In the poem that we heard, I related a lot to the part that was like, you're trying to build up strength to not be overwhelmed by the world, and that causes more suffering. And the way out of that is to drop cowardice. Can you talk about that?
Well, I don't think I ever did before realization. So I don't know if I'd still agree with that statement. So I have to go back and look and try to find the context of the stuff that I wrote. So Rose was talking about, and so it's a way to confront somebody who is caught up with fear, is to give them the suggestion that fear is a coward, and you can let it go. I didn't see that I ever let anything go. So things were taken away. So I don't try to tell people to let go of things, but it's a way to present an opposing view, you could say.
And what do you make of this conversation about whether that letting go is something that we encourage or that happens on its own?
Yeah.
Insightful.
So if you recognize the fact that you're identified with a coward, it may affect the machinery's operation. To me, the same thing happens. To me, the reason to watch the mind is like with the double slit experiment in physics. The observation may affect the outcome. And so the more conscious we become of what the mind machinery is doing, it may affect the outcome. I don't know if it does for sure. I suspect it does.
A brief quote that of yours that you wrote in our online so I kind of cherry picked parts of it to summarize what you said.
You can't do that as well with a living guru. You better stick with Ramana Maharshi and the folks.
Well, it reflects, what you just said. And it's what we are observed, and the more we notice what we observe, the better the machinery seems to work.
That's my bias. Yeah, I can't prove it to myself.
Yeah, I heard you say at one point that I think in retrospect, you think your path was actually a devotional path.
Yeah.
Which kind of not shocked me, but I just consider you such a kind of analytical person. You, by your own admission, very logical kind of person. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that? How you figure?
Well, even at the time, I had the view that I was trying to feel my way in the dark. But I never really thought of what I was doing was a bhakti type path. But it was a feeling path in many ways. My commitment was to become the truth at any cost. And so a good friend of mine who's also quite analytical said, how can you be in love with some abstraction? And to me, that's you find your ideal, you are in love with your ideal, and that's what you want to become. And to me, that's the bhakti path. So the mind may still be active doing analytical stuff, but underneath it is a lot of feeling stuff going on. Intuition is basically a feeling level, but a sophisticated level of feeling. It computes all the data from our life experience, including feelings, including thoughts, including pictures, and the whole thing. But it's not an emotional process like decision making is. So I assume that's going to be the case with anybody who's and so another example of that where you tend to see one side of the coin, not the other, is I always saw a lot of fear in myself. When I met Harding, I think it was the second trip over to Harding, I was too lazy to go to one of his workshops. I didn't want to waste that much time. So I asked him if I could come over and spend time with him. And he very graciously said, yeah. And then both times I was over there, I went back like 3 or 4 months later. I wasn't planning to go back that soon, but a couple of the students at Pittsburgh wanted to meet him. And so I asked Harding if they could come over, and I didn't get any response. So then I wrote back a little later and said, if I come over and bring him over, is that okay? And he said, yeah, come on over. So we really hit it off. We felt like we'd been family forever. And and both times, though, he set up a workshop with some of his students who were fairly close by to do what I wasn't willing to do, to go to one of his workshops. And the second one, after one of the experiments, exercises or whatever, he pounded the side of his chair and he said, so he asked me what I thought about it, and I was being real quiet. And I said, well, I get what this is all about, but there's still too much of me here, And so he pounded the side of his chair and he says, the only thing that's holding you up is pride. And that came as a big shock to me because I didn't see that side of the equation. I was always looking at the flip side of the coin.
You mean you were looking at your humility?
I was in touch with my fears and not my prides. Okay. Yeah.
Did specific aspects of pride arise? You knew all along, you suddenly saw, oh, I'm smarter than the average bear. Whatever the pride was, did you see all
No,
that?
I continued to ignore it. but stuff like that gets in, it loosens things up. Uh-huh. And the other thing about meeting Harding was I'd been working with Rose for 25 years, I think, and I was working through the paradigm of the self is inside, anything in the view is outside. The self is, the viewer is within, the unknown viewer is within, anything in the view is outside. So there's got to be a paradigm of inside-outside that you're working through. And most of the time, we aren't even conscious of so it's like colored glasses, and we aren't conscious of what that paradigm is. When I met Harding, maybe even before I met him, I read something that I think it was when I met him. I think it was one of the experiments he did with me. I saw his view that anything in the view is within me. And when that occurred, I realized this is a paradigm that's the opposite of the one that I believe is valid, but I couldn't see that it was more or less valid. And the mind hates that, at least my mind did. So to see two opposite ways of looking at something that were both equally valid, it doesn't compute with them. The mind wants to be able to say, okay, this is the one that's more valid, and then put it on a shelf and go back to sleep. And so, and seemingly for a period of time, my mind would flip back and forth at will between those two paradigms, especially like when I was around a lot of people, like on the train ride from Harding's back to the airport outside of London. And it really loosened things up in a way that other convictions, seeing the opposite side of other convictions, hadn't done as much. So to me, I put a lot of credit on that loosening of paradigms, and then being conscious of which paradigm you're looking through if you're using more than one.
So Richard Rose wasn't aware of that in the paradigm?
He was aware of Harding. I don't think he was impressed by Harding. What he knew of him.
But it helped you immensely.
Immensely, yeah.
What's the difference between the Keystone belief of individuality and personhood? Like, individuality is more general, just individual.
Yeah.
What was the question?
Like, what's the difference between the belief of individuality and personhood?
Personality versus individuality.
Personhood.
Personhood. Yeah, so personhood, the hood is the person is the Greek word for mask, right? So your personality is the mask that you're presenting to the world and trying to convince yourself is what you are.
Individuality is just a separateness.
Yeah. So if I ask people about separateness, it means different things to different people. Yeah, so to me that's my idea of the problem is the belief. So my belief that I pared my self-definition down to was I am a separate something that's aware. I didn't even tell myself something, but that was unnecessary to state because my mind couldn't conceive of anything that wasn't a thing. So my conviction was I'm a separate awareness. And then a sub-conviction was my awareness or my consciousness may be dependent on the body and a working brain. And I didn't have any way, and the universe didn't find any way to challenge that because I would have had to cut my head off to see if I'd still be here, right? Yeah. It turned out that wasn't necessary to be challenged. Yeah, so individuality. So here's the thing that I saw. It's in Rose's Direct Mind Experience book. I'm sure I've read it multiple times. It never hit me until just a couple of years ago. And he nailed this. He said, you are aware prior to birth and aware after you die. So you begin with awareness, but you are not conscious of awareness. And so usually we use those words interchangeably, consciousness and awareness, right? So Rose wasn't a wordsmith. He wouldn't have cared if you wanted to flip them the opposite way he was using them, but he was trying to point out there's something different, something you are not aware. So when we're 3 years old, we're not self-conscious. When we're 4 years old, let's say, we start becoming self-conscious. And so what we are mostly is we're conscious that we're conscious. I mean, most of the time we aren't even aware of that, right? But when we have these remembering spots, oh, I'm here, that kind of thing, we're conscious of consciousness.
So is that what gets you up to like that last pole you're going on, E and F? you know, between mind process, observer, and
Yeah.
consciousness awareness.
Yeah, so what I saw in my last solitary retreat, I'd been working with some statements in Harding's book on death. What's the title of that one? The Little Book of Life and Death. Yeah. There's one section in there that had, I don't know, a dozen or so statements that were, I forget the title of it. I've written it different times, but I forget. And what I found my mind doing for maybe a day or 2 days was I would take each statement and I would ask myself, can I see this for myself rather than just agree with it? And I think what that meant is I had to have first-person evidence that would support that. And so in some cases, I could go through, say like every word or phrase in the statement and look and see, yes, I have evidence that supports that. But some I couldn't. And so it took quite a while to go through. That's when I became my own authority. Okay. Yeah. And then the other thing that happened was the last couple days in the retreat, the words open sesame were hitting my mind out of the blue several times a day. And whenever that happened, I automatically was doing the Harding pointing exercise of looking back at what I was looking out from. And I'd done that hundreds of times and I'd seen nothing. And that's also Harding says, yeah, you don't see anything, right? And then he gives you a lot of suggestions to buy into. So he also told me he wasn't above using hypnosis to try to counter hypnosis. So he knew what he was doing. But so this time, though, when I look back, but that happened, you know, I don't know, maybe a dozen times in the last 2 days of my retreat, my solitary retreat, and I still didn't see anything. But then on Sunday night, which was the last day of the retreat, I came back I was in a little cabin across the road from Lake Erie. And I wanted to see the sunset over Lake Erie, but I saved it for the last night. And so that Sunday evening, I walked across to watch the sunset on the lake. And then I came back to the cabin, and I was sitting in a chair doing nothing for the second time in my life, which I thought, oh my God, this is wonderful, doing nothing. Because my mind always had to be doing something. It was, you know, active. And then open sesame hit my mind again. And that time when I looked back at what I'm looking out from, I saw something. And what I saw was awareness. And something held my focus back there. So whenever I'd done the Harding exercise, it's instantaneous. At least for me, there was no way to keep staring at it. It was just an instantaneous. You look back and then the mind immediately comes back this way. And my interpretation, I was talking to Teresa about this earlier, my interpretation of that is when we get that look back and see nothing, no movement, no noise, that represents death. And so we're like in a revolving door, and there's no way in hell I'm going back that way. I'm coming back out into the department store here, where all the goodies are.
Because it looks frightening.
Frightening, yeah. Yeah.
Like you'll die.
Yeah.
But you don't realize you won't die. Well, you do die, your ego dies, but you think you're going to all the way annihilate?
Maybe.
So, there are 2 doors?
Revolving door.
Oh, okay, because I heard that story of people going to that point and still very frightening. For Norio was a joke. He stopped the truck to laugh his ass off.
Uh-huh. Well, you get beyond it, but...
So it could be depending on the person.
Yeah, everybody's life experience is somewhat different, isn't it? Or largely different.
And doesn't it seem like most people's awakening experience is largely different?
Well, if their awakening experience is different, then I question it.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's beyond experience. It's a type of knowing the mind has never been familiar with.
So that the mind has never
been familiar with absolute knowing, absolute being. Yeah. The mind is familiar with perceptual knowing and conceptual knowing.
So that's why we don't want to go into it, because we think with the mind and the body. Okay.
Probably this last moment there is no choice to go there. I'm thinking like you probably cannot willfully like choose to, okay, I'm like at this last stage. I'm like scared maybe, or I say, oh, I'm gonna ignore this fear and just like go there. I don't think you can probably cannot do that.
I guess the people that go through the revolving door, maybe that's spontaneous combustion or something. Maybe that's what, they don't come back, I guess. Or they die, or...
Yeah, so what I found after my head, you could say, was focused on watching awareness, it became obvious. I don't like to give you suggestions because your path up to realization may be completely different. But in my case, what I saw was that awareness only had one characteristic, and that was being self-aware. And so as I continued staring at that, there was something going on. I wasn't watching it consciously, but I'd say it was my intuition processing this data, because the words that would come to my mind then were, for example, when I saw that awareness had only one characteristic and it was being self-aware, then the words that came back, but there was duration between these, so it wasn't like psychic input that might have been coming boom, boom, boom. There was duration and then the input would come, so that's why I think it was the intuition doing the processing. If that's the case, it doesn't need my help. If awareness is self-aware, it doesn't need my help. And then a little more duration, and then the words were, this new view and my old view or present view can't both be true. One of them has to be wrong. They're opposing, and one of them has to be wrong. So my present view, meaning I'm a separate awareness. So awareness would need help being aware for me, right? Separate awareness. And after another duration, the conviction hit my mind, Art Ticknor never was. Never existed. I forgot the exact word. Never was, never existed.
And that's really true.
Yeah. So I think the words that hit my mind, I'd have to go back and read my notes from there. I think it was Art Ticknor never existed. And now I would argue, no, Art Ticknor does exist. Art Ticknor never was. So I'd like to make the words Art Ticknor never was, but I don't know if I'd have to look back to see if that's what really hit my mind. But yeah, but so when that occurred, so I think if I were 30 years old and never come across anybody who talked about this kind of stuff, I wouldn't have any preparation for that. And it could be highly traumatic, you could say. Rose, it was very traumatic for Rose. Yeah. For me, there was a sigh of relief, and then, boom, discontinuity, and I found myself back home.
Well, he says in that meditation book that you don't like meditate on the fact that you won't exist. Your mind can't be ready for that. Something like that.
Yeah.
It's an advanced thing.
Yeah, well, that would be imagination. What you can meditate on is what you can observe. Mm-hmm.
Art, you talk about longing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find what you were longing for in the sense that what you were longing for is what you found?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So you're longing for what you didn't know, because you said your mind doesn't know absolute awareness.
So the way I talked to myself about the longing was it keyed in with identity crises that I was having for the 6 years before I met Rose. And that was, something's missing, I don't know what it is. So
you're missing home.
Well, and the longing, it became obvious to me that it was basically the current, the life force coming into me had a vibration. And the vibration was saying, come home, come home.
And that was from the absolute.
Well, don't know. At that time, I had no idea, but yeah. So I couldn't conceive of what absolute would be.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's why you can't just tell us right now.
I can tell you, but it doesn't do any good.
That's why you read that.
That's why Rose recommended rapport, because he also did a little experimenting, and he realized if he tried to bring somebody into realization, they would have no way of knowing whether what they experienced was artificial or real.
Yeah.
And so his second conclusion was, if the student can get in rapport with the teacher, then if the teacher holds his head in a certain way, the student can,
Receive it.
yeah, because there aren't two minds.
Right.
Yeah.
With the absolute. Yeah.
Art, could you say again, what is the linchpin of the arch?
The way I word it for myself was, I'm a separate awareness, a separate something that's aware. So to me, it's individuality. And unfortunately, as we get more sophisticated and read more and more spiritual literature and stuff like that, we can adopt those beliefs. But it's different knowing the truth than knowing the truth. That's why Rose called it becoming. So you end up becoming what you've always been, but it's a conscious change.
Or can you describe some of the stones that go up to the arch?
Well, yeah, I mean, just in general, I'm a person who's symmetrical with other people. This is Harding again. So when you do the tube experiment, Harding's tube experiment, there's a set of questions comes along, and you can look at those and get an idea of what he was talking about, or find somebody to do it with you. You can even do it with a mirror. And the idea of symmetry is a third-person view. It's not our first-person view. So when I look at you, I see a head. When I look at myself, I don't see a head. I could see the outline of a nose, sort of, but I don't see a head. So it's not symmetrical. And if you do like Max Planck and draw a picture of yourself, have you seen that drawing? He was on a divan, whatever you call them, thing, you know, this chaise longue, is that it? Where you're stretched out on a chair, and he made a picture of himself based on what he could see, and it was torso down. And when Harding saw that, when he was like 30 years old, it really lit a flame for him.
So your face doesn't really belong to you, it belongs to everybody else,
Yeah.
and vice versa.
But as kids, we're told that face in the mirror, oh, that's you, right? So we adopt that third person view. Yeah, of course that's me.
That's why we have to help each other when we dribble on our chin and stuff.
Especially as we get older.
Yeah.
What? Would one of the stones in the arch be something like, well, I'm a pretty decent guy.
Sure.
I would never X, Y, or Z.
Right, yeah.
All those false beliefs that we take.
Mm-hmm. And then the ones like doership, decision-making, you know, control.
Have to be in control. So we meant.
Well, controlling. I'm the one who either is controlling or should be in control, right? So if you introspect the mind a little bit and just put on the table the question of what do I believe, not at a sophisticated level, but at a gut level, what do I believe I am? And so those are basically, when you get down to that level, those are the underpinnings of the state of mind that's operational at any time. State of mind is a series of convictions. You get to see a taste of it in moods. When moods change, convictions change, but moods are sort of evanescent. The state of mind usually kicks around for quite a while until some trauma hits it and it flips.
So traumas are good? Traumas are good?
Well, I think traumas are a quick way to get disillusioned, but painful, and just an erosion of illusions is a longer path.
So divorce can be good.
Marriage can be good.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's like
It is what it is.
Eating a pig may be good for eating a pig may be good for the eater, maybe not for the pig. You have to go through the whole set of, if something's good, you look at, is it good for me or good for the other person, So,
So Art, what you said that you thought you were individual awareness? Okay, so what about attention? Are you like a point of attention in awareness?
I didn't have that feeling, no.
What is the question? I don't understand it.
She wondered if I felt like I was a point of attention in awareness. Attention.
I mean now.
Now?
Now.
Okay.
No, now I know what I am.
Well, awareness, right? Or, well, yeah, never mind.
Well, I wrote that down recently. Yeah, where is that? I don't know if I've got it on here or not. Oh yeah, here's what I am. I am absolute being, which is not a thing. It's before time and space, has no parts, knows itself, is the source of consciousness and the cosmos, including Art Ticknor.
Is that on one of your books?
No, it's on my clipboard. I'll have to put it on my book, so I'll sell it.
But you're not claiming that for Art Ticknor. I mean, that's a pretty grandiose claim, right? I am absolute being and so forth. But I mean, Art Ticknor is not that.
No, I think my claim is more grandiose, isn't it? I'm the creator of the cosmos, including consciousness, including Art Ticknor.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. It's not Art Ticknor's claim.
Right.
Yeah.
So we actually create the wreck in our life too. Yes or no?
Question mark.
What was your question? What did you ask?
We create the wreck in our life too.
The wreck?
The wreck,
Create?
the problems.
The wreckage?
I just didn't
Yeah,
understand.
the wreckage.
We
We
create.
create that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you hear that a lot, don't you?
Yeah. Is it true? Yes or no?
Well, the answer is look for yourself, see what you can see.
So what do you think about the idea that the reason we have good things and bad things is if without the bad things you wouldn't see the good things?
Well, the dimension is one of opposites. And so anything that exists, there's going to be an opposite of it existing also. Not necessarily at the same time, in the same place, but yeah, but that's just the nature of duality. And in our individual experiences, I don't know that there's a balance of opposites. Like I felt for 50 years that I was happy 5% of the time if I exaggerated, and unhappy 95% of the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so I feel there must be somebody somewhere who was happy 95% of the time.
If there is a balance.
Well, I think the universe is balanced.
Okay.
I think that's a big job for some engineering crew.
But also, don't you think what's good and bad that's a judgment? It's all relative. Like something that's good for you might not be good for me. It's just my opinion.
If you're the pig and I eat it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who's to say what's good or bad?
And also different times, like something that may feel bad at one time then creates conditions.
You guys are muddying the waters.
That's just
To make
like,
them
why
seem
you can't put it in a box.
I don't. You don't want to dispense with discrimination because basically the machinery's job toward disillusionment is figuring out what's more truthful and less truthful. So it can't figure out what absolute truth is, but it can look for relative, and it's not going to be 100% right, but that's sort of its job, I think.
That's not probably going to be answerable for me, but to be able to hear it. But if I were the guy on the gurney, I'm just referencing your life experience. I imagine knowing myself as ultimate being would provide some comfort.
Oh my God, big time, yeah.
However, it's not like a thought, right? It's not I can only think of it as everything's going to be all right. It's like some kind of comfort, but that's,
the state of mind changes. And I remember Rose used to say that the closest to sanity in this dimension is the state of mind of self-realization. So what I know now, my conviction now is I'm not something that was born and is going to die. My conviction is what I experience has no effect at all on me. And so those are all beliefs we have that can be challenged. So there are tons of them that we're hanging on to. So who doesn't believe they're affected by negative emotions, right? Who doesn't feel they're affected by suffering? But I know that's not the case. So anything I experience, I know it doesn't affect what I am. And so that is you can't imagine the relief that provides. It's the whole problem of existential angst just evaporates.
And it's not a intermediate step of, who am I again?
Yeah.
On that, okay, it's okay. It's not that.
No,
Yeah.
No, it's a conviction state that the mind has to operate with. Now, I don't know if the mind gets tangled and snarled and the brain gets tangled and snarled, whether that conviction state would change. So all this stuff is temporary. So that's one thing that nobody mentioned that I would add to the list, only because I saw in retrospect, maybe I even got I think I saw it even before retrospect, is that the whole struggle for the seeker is temporal versus eternal. And so it's always a contest between the bird in the hand versus some imaginary bird in the bush. But one we're talking about is temporary, and the other, and so that's why I think a seeker needs to be as greedy as possible. Don't settle for wanting more happiness. Admit to yourself that you want eternal happiness.
Why do you think those are, you made it seem like it was like two choices.
It's a contest for energy.
That's kind of competing desires, too.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, opposing forces.
Yeah, well, yeah. The opposing forces to me are a little more like different, separate or something like that.
But, when you talk about competing for energy, putting energy directly into eternal happiness doesn't seem like something that we can do, so that I can do directly. It's not clear what that means.
Well, yeah, directly what you can do is conserve energy. And you can encourage things to occur that conserve body energy and mental energy into something more refined. Possibly.
So is it kind of like what we're wishing for, or what we're...
Yeah, I think it's being greedy, really. It's just admitting, it'd be nice to have this right now, even though I know it's not going to last, but it'll make me happy for a while. Versus, no, I'm going to deny myself that.
Brett, I think he didn't say happiness. Is it temporal or eternal? I think you added the happiness. Happiness exists in the temporal, not in the eternal.
So this competition for energy,
Is that true?
what,
Yeah.
who's competing with who?
No happiness
Because
is
in the
eternal.
eternal, there's no...
Well, the competition for energy allocation is basically a decision-making process.
You mean it's your energy, you're talking about
Yeah,
your energy.
yeah.
What's allotted to you?
I'm not competing with other people.
No, your own,
Your own mind.
your own energy, yeah. What you're gonna devote that to, or where that's gonna flow.
Are you gonna spend your money on an expensive dinner or on a retreat?
I think the same thing.
There are energy benders too, though. Feed your energy.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have to be a little careful who you spend your time with.
You know, in teacher, I'm aware of that has encouraged that kind of thought or whatever. No, don't, wish to be CEO, wish to be Lord of the Universe. And so I want to make sure I get the teaching part of that. Is it mostly that I admit to myself that I really want, like you said, that guy that, I forget who it was, said somebody, he wanted all the Dallas.
I want to be the ruler of the universe, that guy.
Well,
The only honest person in Pittsburgh?
The guy who wanted, all the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. You told me that, who it was.
Yeah, I forgot that one too, yeah.
So what is that teaching pointing to? Is it
Well, to me,
what I really want?
yeah, I think that's the key. If we see what we really, really want, that and we also scan the mind to see, now wait a second, am I being honest about this, or are there holdouts? So if you see what you really want is to become enlightened, and you say, okay, now is there anything that is going to trump that if the contest comes up? So we're talking about like serving two masters, right? So if we try to serve two masters, eventually you can expect that they're going to want your attention, your fealty at the same time, and you'll have to make a decision. Yeah. So to me, if you see what you truly want from life, and you scan the horizon, the inner horizon as much as possible, and see whether there are any holdouts, and you don't find any, then that actually becomes a commitment, a real commitment, as opposed to like a New Year's commitment. And then if you remember, so you want to tell yourself or remind yourself that you have a commitment to X, then if an opposition comes up to that, a challenge it comes up, something wants to, that it might be a responsibility also, but what you consider a lesser responsibility, if that tends to threaten your main objective, then it gets a secondary rating.
So that's like likes and dislikes, the attachments and stuff, those things have to drop away, or we can't be committed to the number one thing.
Well, they don't have to drop away, but if a competition comes up, then you'll find out whether you've seen what you really want or not.
So Mike Guggenheimer said, it's not that you have to give it up, you have to be willing to give it up. Like, does that sound right? Or? Yeah. I think the best you can do is you can just try to conceive of how it might come up and interrupt. Not just interrupt, but threaten what your primary objective is. And then you don't know what's going to happen, but if that does happen, you'll find out what you really want, which is more important to you. Yeah.
What would be one or two examples of, a competing thing that you have to?
Wealth versus X, love versus security versus, whatever.
Like you say, every Saturday I'm gonna meditate for an hour and journal and stuff, and then someone calls you and say, hey, you wanna go out for some drinks and watch the game? Mm-hmm. Which one are you committed to?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That's why Rose, had people do commitments to a project or commitments to a thing. Like the card thing you gave us. Like make commitments and keep them.
Yeah, that's at a lesser scale. Okay. Yeah.
You can't do those, you're not going to do the higher scale though. I mean, doesn't that help prepare you?
Question mark.
Did
Yeah,
you say somewhat?
Question mark.
Oh, question.
Yeah. I have the bias that would be helpful. but I know people who've managed to find a different approach to life and who've been successful. So each mentality is different. You work with what you got.
I'm getting back a little, just, I don't know, this was about the revolving door. Is there a name for that? Like to that point, where you get to that point where you're either going to laugh your ass off or you're going to cry because you don't want to let go of that ego. That point right there, is there like a definition of that?
I would just say you're becoming more conscious of what's going on.
You're becoming conscious of awareness.
No.
That's after you go out towards the door.
Becoming more conscious of mind activity.
Okay.
Is that on the ladder? No.
Yeah, the latter sort of, I guess, reflects how much of your illusion has been shaken, become unsteady. So if you look at beliefs, so Gurdjieff had a breakdown of like 7 levels of man. Rose thought the first 4 that he had were good, and the rest of them were questionable. But so Rose used the category of instinctive level, emotional level, intellectual level, and then 4th way from Gurdjieff's terms. And so that would be a way to construct an imaginary ladder of where people stand.
Is that Albertine?
It's in the Albertine paper somewhere, yeah.
So Art, looking at the list behind you, the first one is feelings.
Yeah.
And competing desires is there too. So what was your experience in understanding your relationship to feelings and whether they affected you?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is one time Mike Connors and his brother were staying at my house before a TAT meeting, during a TAT meeting, but it was the Friday evening. It must have been an April TAT meeting because there was going to be a business meeting at the farm. And so Mike asked me if I was going out to the business meeting. I said, no, I don't think so, because Bob Sergel is going to be there and I've got a bone to pick with him and I don't want to get into it. I forgot exactly how I said it, but I said something about feeling. And I've got feelings that I don't want to deal with, something like that. Yeah, that I don't want to deal with. And Mike Connors looked at me like I was some kind of a nut. He says, what? Feelings aren't something to deal with. Feelings are something to feel. And I thought, wow, what a revolutionary concept. So I wasn't particularly conscious of my feelings.
So did you go at that point?
Did I go?
Did you change your mind and go anyway?
I don't think so. I don't remember it. So, and then the desires part of feelings. Once I made a solid commitment to becoming the truth, I didn't seem to have a big argument with desires. There were always desires coming up for temporal satisfaction, like I was being celibate, and you can imagine what the temporal desire for the opposite would be. And I was lucky. I was, like I was shielded from a lot of times people would be attracted to me and it would just go completely over my head. And then, so a combination of, and then I also learned to turn my head away from stuff. So when I first became celibate, I realized when I went out for a walk in Columbus, I would be drawn by something to figures that had sexual interest for me. And I learned very quickly, no, I have to turn my head away from that. Don't look. Yeah. So I was protected in a lot of ways. I didn't do that stuff. It just... And I think the commitment actually draws protection from a higher place.
We have 2 minutes. She's not done yet. Do you have any further questions?
So is the main thing that's taking so long is that we believe in our individuality and all the keystones haven't fallen out yet? Or is it just different for every person?
Well, I think it varies by mentality, by person, yeah. So I have no way of knowing if everything has been predetermined, whether everything is 100% random or some combination of the two. So you go with your bias of so my feeling is that no, everything hasn't been 100% determined, and putting effort into things may have an effect. I have no way of knowing whether that effect's going to be positive or negative, but you go with your biases, with your, hopefully intuition, which isn't foolproof. And basically listen to what you get from so-called authorities, people who maybe had a breakthrough, but you gotta watch your own mind.
Thank you, Art. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Art.
I thought I did a good job with this.
Oh, it's
The writing.
I have a picture.
Oh, good.